Hi everyone and welcome back to Story of the World Highlights. Today we're going to be discussing chapter 37, which brings us to Africa. So some beginning information you should know before we dive into the details of this chapter was that a lot of Africa was known to people as the Dark Continent. And this was because their history wasn't written down. So many people didn't know much about their history, even though they had just as vibrant histories as any other European or Asian country. And so how do we know anything? Well, we know some things from different people who traveled to the area and documented things that happened. And we also know from oral stories, which are stories passed down through the generations. So from grandpa to dad, dad to son, like this. Now, the other thing you should know before we jump into this chapter is that it mentions in 1824, two English merchants met with King Shaka, and they talked to him about building a trading port. So he did give them some land, thinking they were harmless, and they named that land Durban. So as you can see from the map, the blue dotted line is the Zulu Empire, and that dot is Durban. And just for reference, the dot on the other side is Cape Town, part of the Cape Colony we'll discuss later. So now let's dive in. The first part of this chapter is about that king I mentioned, Shaka. And we're going to see how he became king and how he died. So let's start with, who was his mother? His mother was a princess of a Zulu area, and her name was Nandi. And she ended up marrying a Zulu chieftain of the village next door, basically. And chieftain means future leader, like a king. And people were not really excited about their marriage. They were a little concerned because they were both Zulu. So they worried that their families were too closely related. And with that, they were kind of mean to Nandi. And when Nandi had a son, who was Shaka, they were mean to him too. And finally, Mom decided it was time for them to leave the village and start a new life elsewhere. And they ended up settling in a nearby region in a village called Mfecane. And there, they were able to live in some peace. We have Shaka learning to be a good army leader, growing nice and strong and tall. And finally, when news broke that his dad had died in the Zulu Kingdom, Shaka headed back to kind of take revenge and show them that he wasn't that weak little boy anymore. He was a strong man who was going to take over and lead this country, or this group of people now. So here we have Shaka right there. And Shaka, the king of the Zulus, he was able to easily take over the kingdom because he had Mfecane army soldiers with him. And as king, one of his first orders of business was that he decided he wanted to reform or make better the army strategies of the Zulu people. Now, his strategy was famously known as the bull strategy because it kind of looks like a bull's head with the horns. And the idea is that the enemy is that E spot I drew, and team 1 would go directly to the enemy and they would attack head on. And then teams 2 and 3 would go around the sides and attack from the back. Now, team 4 is standing off to the side, ready to jump in if one of the first 3 teams needed assistance. And so that was one of his major changes he did. Another one is he said that traditionally Zulu people had been fighting with spears, but that was really difficult and not always accurate. He thought there could be lots better accuracy and just overall better chances of winning if they used shorter knife types. And they used that to have face-to-face combat, close range, and it was very successful for the Zulu people. Now, after he had enhanced the army and their strategies, he decided it was time to take over Mfecane. And he wanted to have Mfecane join the Zulu land and him be the ruler of both. And so that he did do. He ended up killing the king and adding Mfecane to the Zulu Empire. Now, in 1818, we have a period known as the Crushing. And this period happens because after the Mfecane joined the Zulu tribe, Shaka wanted to expand his land further. So he started moving into Central Africa and neighboring tribes, and he started to conquer them. But he wasn't using the normal strategies and rules that a lot of fights had been fought before in the past. He this time was using his bull strategy and just being very aggressive with his fighting. He killed so many people in these battles, and he made lots of people flee their villages, and he even destroyed villages. So this was known again as the Crushing, because he was just crushing people in villages along his way. In 1827, when his mom dies, we see Shaka start to become mad. And he was just heartbroken, but the way he went about it was a little crazy. Things like he would kill the mom cows so that their babies knew what it felt like to lose a mom. These were all really strange, and his warriors knew this too. But his warriors didn't say anything because they're like, I kind of understand, kind of. But eventually, they had had enough. And that final straw came when they were just so exhausted from constant battling. They would go out and have a battle and then come back exhausted and ragged. And then Shaka would just send them out again with no rest. And that they couldn't deal with. And so finally, they decided to work with his half-brother. And his half-brother, along with these warriors, were able to overthrow Shaka and kill him. And so now with Shaka dead, the new king of the Zulus was his half-brother, Mfecane. So that's our first part of the chapter. Now we jump a little bit to what was happening in the colonies, the Cape Colony in particular. And this is between a group of people known as the Boers and the British. So to start off, the Dutch, which are people from the Netherlands, had settled in this Cape Colony and made this Cape Colony a long time ago when they first started trading, because this was a great halfway point on their way from the Netherlands to India, China, Japan. This was a good halfway spot to refuel and get more water and things. So they had developed a colony, and over time, more and more Dutch people came to live there. And what did they do there? Well, they set up farms. They had brought sheep, they were farming the land, and they were getting really good at farming that land and even expanding into lands belonging to other nearby tribes, which was not a fan favorite of those tribes. And these people, because they were such good farmers, their name Boer actually explains that. Their name Boer in Dutch means farmer. So this group was named after the thing they were very good at. And of course, as we know, the Dutch East India Trading Company was one of the big people in the triangular trade selling slaves. So the Dutch had lots of slaves on their farms working. There was estimated around 15,000 slaves in this colony working on farms. Now, the Dutch lived there for a long time, but eventually in 1820, the English claimed that colony. When they claimed that colony, they had to start enforcing their rules on the Boer people. Now, the Boer people hated these rules. In particular, they hated the Emancipation Act, which we learned about last chapter, where slavery was no longer allowed. This ruined their whole way of life. And so they decided they had enough, and they packed up, and they decided to move into Central Africa and find a new place to settle. This move into Central Africa was known as the Great Trek. Trek is just journey. And so in this Great Trek, first they had tried a lot of different areas, and they didn't find one that was suitable until they landed in the Zulu lands. In the Zulu lands, they said this area is perfect to settle in. Let's settle down here. Now, King Mfecane did not say anything about it at the time, but when a handful of Boers wandered into his village, he ordered them killed. News of them dying reached their friends, and the Boers declared war on the Zulus. And they had lots of weapons and advantages like guns. Guns are going to beat a spear. But the other thing that really helped them win is that they partnered with Degane's other brother, Mfecane. And with him, they were able to overthrow Degane, and Degane ran fleeing from the village. Now we have Mfecane as the new king of the Zulu people. And with that, the Boers moved further into Zulu lands, and they ended up settling near Durban, which we had mentioned before. Now, they lived pretty well in this area in Durban until the Brits finally took over that area as well. And as you know, the Boers do not like the rules that the British enforce, so they ended up leaving and going on another trek to find better land. That's it for this chapter. I'll see you next time for Story of the World Highlights.